Hello and welcome to this COMP3218 game design and development video for the University of Southampton. Today we are going to be looking at some more of the first coursework submitted by our students. My name is Tom Blount, I am one of the course lecturers, and I am joined here today by...
Hi, I'm Callum, I'm one of the demonstrators.
Cool, and Callum, can you tell us a bit about what we asked the students to do?
So for this one, the two key points here was that they were asked to design a game with a very clear core dynamic that's supported by all of the other choices made in development, and a game that has a good tutorial, whether that's separate or integrated into the rest of the game.
Okay, let's get started. And this game is Light the Way. So already, really nice title screen. We've got a light, we've got somebody skulking around in the dark, so it's already setting the tone for the game.
I'm curious to see what's under the credits.
So I checked that, and I don't think they hooked the button up correctly because it just goes to the level select screen, which is a bit of a shame.
Fair enough.
Ooh, look at that. So I kind of like that they've built the controls into sort of the tile map in the background, but I might not have noticed that immediately. But okay, A and D. So we're gonna walk along this way. Quite slow at walking. Alright, section complete.
It's I like the way that you you actually cross behind the door.
Yeah, that's a nice little touch. So we've got W for jump. So again, slowly drip feeding us the different mechanics. Okay, so now it's dark. There's a light. We've got a light. Makes sense. Although I think our torch is burning out. Yeah. And then it gets brighter when we pick up that thing. So that was good because they didn't actually need sort of any words to tell us how that worked. They just showed us it. Okay, so we've got that's a pit. So not only do we have to jump up to get that thing, we have to jump up to get over the pit. There we go. Those torches seem a lot brighter when they're on the wall than when I'm carrying them.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got a monster. We haven't been told how to attack, so I'm going to assume we can't. We just have to go around.
Alright, you've got the skull and crossbones on the wall there, so...
Yeah. It's nice of that goblin to carve a skull and crossbones into the cave wall. So we got another torch, another goblin. Just nope, no thank you. Oh. Okay, I was worried that wasn't actually going to kill me.
With the shadow, when the first swing came round, I thought it was like a giant shoe stomping on you.
Well, I can't get past. Okay.
So one thing. I just want to mention this before I forget about it. With that pit in the last room, where you had to jump over it, and they had the little torch above, I think while I like the fact that they've got the torch above it to try and indicate to you that, hey, you should jump up here. I guess there's a risk that by doing it that way, if the player jumps up to get the torch because they're relatively short kind of field of vision, they might just not notice there's a pit there at all.
Well, then they'd learn quickly, right? And that's it's nice that they've broken it up into sort of relatively short levels and sort of checkpoints, if you like, so that if you do that, it's not that punishing. You've learned a valuable lesson.
Yeah. No, I guess you're right. To be fair, I guess you don't really need to teach players that falling into pits is bad.
But you do need to teach them, for example, there might be a pit in the darkness, so it's important that you've got the light.
Yeah.
As I've learned to my detriment. Cool, so I think we've probably seen enough of the game at this point to start looking at it in terms of the mark scheme. So in particular, starting with the overall sort of quality and the aesthetics and the gameplay.
Yeah, so the first category here is the presentation, which for a good on-the-mark scheme, requires key information is shown clearly, graphics are consistent, and there is appropriate use of audio, either effects or music. So, first of all, is there any audio?
So there is some. There's like some footstep noises, or I guess there's a jump noise rather than footstep noises. And there's like a very sort of faint, like, background, like kind of ambient noise rather than music, so...
Okay.
Again.
You're having trouble with that bit.
Yeah, so this is a problem that I guess I might sort of mention, well, I'll mention it now because I'm thinking about it now, but yeah, even when your torch is at full brightness, it's very difficult to see some of those blind jumps. So previously I was like, oh, there's a torch there, so they must be wanting me to pick it up. So I jumped at the torch and then immediately fell to my death, which was a bit of a shame.
Yeah, it's almost like it's better to try and leave the torches on the walls.
But anyway, aesthetics and things like that. So yeah, the sound is nice. It's quite quite minimal. Like, it might be nice if there was some, like, particularly given that we can't see, it'd almost be nice if there was maybe some sort of audio indications as we were getting closer to a monster.
Yeah.
But otherwise,
I
like,
can definitely appreciate that in something like this, maybe for music and such, like, you'd almost want it to be very subtle because, you know, I think that if you had like techno blaring over the top of this, it would definitely undermine the kind of
sneaky aspect of it. Yeah.
Yeah, but no, definitely having audio cues would be helpful.
I have to not get that torch, is what I'm learning. Okay, but yeah, overall the visual style. I mean, it's clear what's a monster. It's clear what's us. It's clear where the torches are. Like, playing with the lighting as a mechanic is kind of nice. I feel like some of these, like, it's odd that when you pick up a torch it gets less bright, but, you know, that's...
Yeah. No, I think there's definitely a consistent feel to the visuals.
Okay, I've made it further, but I don't know where to go. So, moments like this, I can't see any of the rest of the screen. Oh, so we can technically see the edge of the level there. Okay, now I'm at the other side of the pit, but I can't actually see the door.
Yeah. So I guess this is something that, I guess, depending on how you're looking at it, is either a case of, from a presentation perspective, you know, the visual design, they've cut too much of the map off, like they've restricted your field of view too much, or from a level design perspective, if you wanted to have that very restricted field of view, you need to design the levels so that you can still navigate them.
Well, okay, so let's decide on a mark for the overall aesthetic before we or the overall presentation before we carry on. And in terms of information design, like, again, obvious what's a bad thing, obvious what's us, obvious where we're trying to go because of the way the doorways all look fairly unique. Slightly less obvious in terms of we can't see where the door is, so we're just sort of blindly fumbling through the level a bit. But as you say, that's maybe a level design issue rather than information design.
I mean, until this level, I would have said that they definitely seem to be using the torches to try and guide you through the level. So, like, you know, you see a torch and then you move towards the next torch.
So, what would a good be for the presentation?
So, yeah, good is key information is shown clearly, graphics are consistent, and appropriate use of audio.
So, I think we're definitely there. What would they need to get or need to do to get better than that?
So excellent would be that key information is shown clearly, there is consistent and appealing graphics, and good use of audio.
So I'm not quite sure they reached that, just because of that. Oh, there's the door.
Ah.
Because of, yeah, it's not like the audio is minimal, which is sort of fitting and nice, but there's definitely sort of scope to do slightly more with it. Like I say, sort of like what do you call it? Proximity audio for when there's monsters nearby and things like that.
Yeah. This is one thing that
but
there's a little platform there. Okay.
But otherwise,
I always find it interesting. Sorry, go on.
But otherwise, like everything is sort of nice. The visual style, like you say, is very sort of consistent. It all sort of ties together quite well. So, what do you reckon? Do you reckon good, or perhaps a notch above it?
Yeah, I'd be happy to go a notch above good, because I think, really, like as you said, there's maybe some extra stuff they could have done with the sound design, and there's a handful of places, particularly in some of the earlier levels. There's been a handful of places where, for instance, the background doesn't quite look right, or you could see
actually no
off the edge of the screen.
I'm gonna say I think we leave it at good, because I've just realised something else that's not quite being displayed is, for example, the hitbox of these enemies and things like that. So that hit me,
right,
and there's no indication of it until a couple of seconds later when I fall down dead.
I guess that's
like,
another thing where like you could even fix that with another audio cue, like
just like an ow, or just flashing the sprite red or white or whatever, or something like that, just so there's an indication that I'm inside this thing's hitbox and it has hit me. Because like there, I think, so as I was jumping through it, it killed me, but then I carried on all the way down there and then suddenly fall over dead. So yeah, in which case I'm going to say we call this a good, but it's a solid good.
Okay, so the next one is gameplay.
Okay, lovely.
So for a good, they would need a set of complementary mechanics, smooth usable controls that leads to meaningful play.
So they definitely have that. They've got all the standard platforming controls of, you know, moving, jumping, picking up, what do you call them? Items, collectibles, things like that.
Yeah.
I guess power-ups was kind of the word I was looking at. Sort of, they power up your lamp. We've got different kinds of enemies. Some that fly, some that thing. We've got the minimizing, the slowly decaying light. And it's definitely leading to meaningful play. I'm avoiding the things, I'm trying to get through the level. I think... yeah. So there's some of the design decisions that I think could be better. So for example, things like that. Even when I've got the full torch, I can't see an enemy that I'm about to jump into, and I can't even see where I'm trying to jump to, or sort of the ultimate direction of the level. So perhaps a more...
I think maybe like one way they could have gotten around that, because also like you can walk around for quite a while without picking up a torch, and it's still like not too bad. So maybe if they could have like extended the maximum range of the torch but had it decay faster, if they wanted to try and emphasize that you've got to really try to get to the next torch as fast as you can.
Yeah.
Although I don't know if that's the goal.
Depending on their core dynamic, they may not want to emphasize that aspect of it. So okay, so what was a good for?
So it's a set of complementary mechanics, smooth usable controls that lead to meaningful play.
And again, I think it solidly hits that. Like there are definitely things that we can think of that would improve the sort of the gameplay, and part of that will fall under the level design as well. But I think this is sort of, particularly the sort of the range of the light and the fact that, well, it's the combination of the two. So it's the range of the light and the fact that the level is set out in such a way that we have to do a lot of blind jumps, sort of does that. But overall, I think it's solidly a good. So what would they have to do to reach an excellent?
So for excellent, they would need a wide set of complementary mechanics, intuitive and smooth usable controls that lead to enjoyable and meaningful play. And I would, at the moment, I think I would probably say it's not there, because at least I think I think that I'd have to take your judgment on the intuitive and smooth controls, but I think they've definitely got the meaningful play down. But I'm not sure if they've got like a wide enough set of mechanics. Like there's the jumping and the picking up of the torches.
So I guess my main argument for it would be like the set of mechanics, or I guess the balance of the mechanics they've used, is hindering the meaningful play. Because, for example, there, I know I have to move quickly because my torch is running down, but I can't sort of time it and go, okay, so the monster's going to be about here, so I need to jump now, because I can't see where the monster is, so I just have to jump and hope. And it means it sort of hinders the enjoyment and the meaningfulness of play, which is why I don't think it reaches an excellent.
Yeah, okay.
But otherwise, right. like I say, good set of mechanics.
Yeah.
Otherwise, the play is good. So we call it a good, and then we look at bugs.
Yeah. So bugs. Again, for a good on bugs, the game is playable, is reasonably complex, and there are only minor bugs, and these are uncommon.
So I would say we're probably there. So again, you sort of get a couple of like little glitches like that where you get stuck on the geometry or trapped behind an enemy or something like that. But they're fairly common. They happen a lot when you're trying to do platforming in Unity. And otherwise, yeah, I'd say the game's reasonably complex.
Yeah, I think I'd be happy with that. We definitely haven't seen any like
certainly nothing
proper game-breaking block. Can't talk today. Proper game-breaking bugs. Ooh.
Ooh, a new kind of enemy.
Climbs up walls.
So again, getting ahead of myself slightly, but it's kind of nice that we have this sort of, again, sort of integrated tutorial. Like these haven't come up, so we're only being introduced to them now in full light, so we can see their behaviour.
The one on the right has now broken.
Okay, so handily we're talking about bugs. So I would say, again, not game breaking, but a bit of an issue that maybe prevents them from getting all the way up to excellent.
Arguably, from a player's perspective, this is quite a nice bug to have.
That is true, but we're not just players, we're looking at this critically.
Yes. That is a very deep level.
It is. So yes, good, and then we move on to look at how they fulfilled the brief, which encompasses things like the level design and the tutorial. So overall level design, it's good, but again, combined with some of the mechanics issues, it's occasionally difficult to work out where you're meant to be going. So like you say, we've got quite a deep level here, so I assumed that we were just travelling right, but maybe we have to go down. I don't know where the ultimate goal is. And as you sort of mentioned before, like that, for example, like I have no way of knowing how deep that goes or whether it's a blind jump or what, so I just have to jump and hope, and I chose wrong.
I mean, to some extent, I guess if they wanted to try and emphasize that you're not always just going to be going right, having that there and then making sure there are enemies in there so you don't get stuck is a good way to tell it. See, you went right and it was wrong. Now try looking around, but it does seem a little bit harsh. Like you could have achieved the same effect with a dead end.
But also, like, I don't know where the door is. It could be in any corner of this map.
Yeah.
So let's refer to the mark scheme. So let's start with a good. What would a good be?
So good is a sensible level design that demonstrates a number of mechanics with good pacing and some clear goals, risks, and rewards. And I
would say it probably meets that.
The main thing that I would argue against in that sense is that I think because of the way that to some extent it feels like they haven't properly accounted for the limited range of vision, those goals, risks, and rewards aren't clear at all. As we've said, you don't always know what you're jumping into or when there's going to be enemies in front of you. So
Yeah, so
for the first few times going through a level, you're kind of just guessing.
So this is a particularly good level to be talking about that on, actually, because in this one there are clearly a number of multiple paths. We're not necessarily sure which path we should be taking because we don't know where we're supposed to be going. But, for example, if I wanted to tackle these things, I could sort of be going this way, or if I wanted to tackle more of these monsters over here, I guess I could sort of stick to the more open area. But, as we've sort of said, it's not obvious which direction we should be aiming for, so I don't know how...
I think when you get to the bottom there, you need to go left.
I think I might as well.
Certain.
Okay, I'll try that. But yeah, so... Okay, so what would a satisfactory be for the level design?
So satisfactory is a sensible level design that demonstrates some of the mechanics with an attempt at pacing and some goals, risks, and rewards.
So do you think it's sort of on like the sort of, again, solidly in a satisfactory, or do you think it's sort of partially between the two? Because it is demonstrating the different mechanics.
Yeah, I think it's definitely got satisfactory. And in terms of pacing, like, the levels are definitely getting more complicated and more expansive. And then again, just before this level, we had that very brief interlude where it's like, "Hey, new enemies, have a look at this," which gives you a chance to kind of
you were right.
relax. So I think the pacing, I think, is pretty good.
Yeah.
Like, really, the main sticking point is just that, you know, it's not clear where you're going or what you're about to bump.
Yeah, what the goal is clear, but how to achieve it isn't necessarily. And that then ties into the risk-reward sort of thing. It's like, okay, should I be doing this path? Should I not? I guess you could also argue that there's the risk-reward thing of, oh, should I get this torch so I've got a longer torch, or should I just go straight for the exit? But I've not really noticed that sort of being like an urgent consideration, particularly because, like, in that level, light didn't seem to be a problem. There were torches everywhere.
Yeah, it kind of seemed like they built the level and then realized you couldn't see what was going on, so they kind of had to light it up a lot more.
So yeah, it's a really cool idea in terms of like a mechanic and a sort of way of, you know, just like a fun twist on sort of an existing puzzle game, existing platformer game, but something that needs to be, I think, a lot tighter, a lot more tightly integrated with the level design. So, so yeah, satisfactory or halfway between satisfactory and good, do you think?
I'd probably be leaning towards satisfactory, but
yeah,
again, I may be being a bit harsh.
No, I think that's probably fair. However, tutorial-wise, I think they're doing pretty well. So they've got they're introducing each of these different mechanics sort of one at a time, and I got into a bit of spikes.
Okay, I take back what I said earlier about that pit. It's a harder jump to make than I thought.
But again, like almost in a way, the fact that you fail in that is a good teaching exercise, because it shows you, A, that there are pits, B, that there are spikes, C, that spikes are bad, and D, that if you die you'll return to the start of the level.
Yeah.
Okay, so
I think...
Go ahead.
Well, we'll have a look at what good says, because I was about to say I think it's good, but...
Yeah, let's consult the mark theme first, and then we'll... Oh no.
A mostly integrated tutorial that communicates most goals, risks, and rewards through level design, and introduces information and mechanics in a logical way that fits with what's gone before. And I would say that they've definitely done that.
Yeah, and I think so. What separates that from excellent? Because as far as I remember, it's to do with the how well integrated it is, among others.
Yeah. So it's it's going up from mostly integrated to just integrated, that communicates all the goals, risks, and rewards, rather than most of them, and introduce information in a way that builds on what's gone before.
So I would say, so the tutorial is good, and it is, I would say it is mostly integrated in the flow of the game, because each new thing is sort of tutorialized within a level. I'm not going to say it's like fully or thoroughly integrated with it, because each separate bit is very much a separate, okay, and now here's the next tutorial bit, rather than it just being sort of part of the overall game flow and sort of each level introducing a new component building on the previous ones.
And this comedian, you've just hit one of the tutorials, because this is the other thing, is that each of those tutorial levels, they have to turn all the lights on, because without that, like, they can't guarantee that you're going to be able to see and understand what's going on.
Which is true, so perhaps that is why they did it in specifically that way. But I think also it's difficult to necessarily communicate the goals, risks and rewards, because, or rather, we've sort of struggled to see them being communicated. So I would perhaps say, again, maybe not quite an excellent, but perhaps just above a good.
Yeah, I think I'd be happy with that.
Okay, so core dynamic.
Yes.
So what did they say the core dynamic for their game was?
They said that the core dynamic of their game was evasion.
Interesting.
Yeah. So they've said that.
Let's hear their argument for it, because I can definitely.
The main idea is to avoid all the enemies and to reach the exit door, which will eventually lead to exiting the cave. And because you've got no way of fighting them, the only way to deal with them is just to avoid them and to get to the exit.
Okay, I can see the logic behind it. So normally, I would say that that whole sort of evasion style of gameplay, or that kind of dynamic, is normally referred to, at least in the sort of material we've covered in the course, as chase and evade.
Yeah.
And that's sort of the thing. We're not being chased by any of these monsters. I would say they're sort of providing obstacles for us as we try and get through the space. Like I would say a lot more of the fun and challenge comes from trying to navigate these platforms and stuff in the dark, and the monsters are just kind of a really awkward platform that you're supposed to avoid, rather than something that's actively chasing you.
Yeah, I personally think this fits much better in the kind of spatial reasoning area than evasion. And I think, from my point of view, the main thing that cuts against it being evasion, other than the fact you're not being actively chased, is that, again, because you can't see a lot of the enemies before you come into contact with them, like, you can't do anything to avoid them. It's just, I jump and, oh, there's an enemy there.
Yeah.
Well, that sucked.
But I can definitely see why they might think it's that, or why perhaps that was the thing they were trying to evoke. But given that we feel that it's probably closer to spatial reasoning, let's look at it in terms of that. So do the mechanics support that particular dynamic?
So in terms of spatial reasoning,
so I tell you what, to kick us off, let's look at the mark scheme again. So what would a good describe?
So a good would be a clear core dynamic that suits the theme of the game and is well supported by the primary mechanics and mostly appropriate audio and visual choices.
So we could argue that it's not necessarily clear, given that there's some sort of confusion between us and them over which one we think it mostly fits.
Yeah, the other thing is that in the game notes they've said that they did mention that there was another dynamic that it could arguably be, but they didn't think it was spatial reasoning. They said that it could potentially be. Sorry, they've said that there is an element of survival, but they don't think it's the primary dynamic.
No, I definitely wouldn't agree with that. So my go-to way of seeing if it's a survival game is usually if you've got a set of limited resources that are constantly running out, and you're sort of going through the level trying to replenish those resources, basically. So think like a hunger bar in something like Minecraft or Subnautica or that kind of thing.
Yeah.
This definitely doesn't feel like a survival game to me, and I keep failing that jump. Okay, so if this were a chase and evade, I would say that the mechanics don't necessarily support it because we're not being chased. Like, we're sort of navigating the monsters rather than evading them, if that makes sense. I know that sounds like sort of semantics, but stick with me for a minute. If this was spatial...
Like, if you stand still right now, like, you can stay there indefinitely and nothing bad is going to happen. Well, it's going to get darker.
Yeah.
But
so this is
to be fair, from where you are, it getting darker doesn't make any difference to what you can see.
Yeah. So we're not having to evade anything at the minute. But this leads me nicely onto my next point, in that if this is spatial reasoning, or even if it's sort of evasion, like the mechanic with the light as it stands, and again sort of combined with the way perhaps the levels are laid out, makes it a lot harder because we can't see the path of the enemies, so we can't sort of plan on evading them in any way. We just have to sort of jump into the darkness and hope that we don't bump into one. So I almost feel like
for spatial reasoning, like, you don't necessarily have the information needed to reason about the environment because you can't see what it is.
So okay, so what would a satisfactory be for core dynamic?
So satisfactory would be a core dynamic that's a poor match for the theme of the game, or is supported by only some of the mechanics and audio-visual choices.
And I would say it's not necessarily a poor one, it's just a combination with perhaps the balance of some of those things. Because I really like the idea of the light as a mechanic making this harder and pushing you to navigate to these other points to collect those things. I think, again, just sort of the combination of perhaps the balance of the radius, the speed of the timeout, and the placement of things in the level make it a little bit trickier. So I would say it's probably above a satisfactory, maybe not quite a good, maybe halfway between the two.
Yeah, I think I'd be happy with that.
Cool, so let's move on to the last category, which is feedback. So we asked, or at the start of development, we gave people feedback about their ideas, and then asked them to talk about how they'd responded to that. So what did they say they were given as part of their feedback?
So the first thing we've got here is that at first they were told that there was too many competing dynamics and they needed to try and focus on one. So originally, apparently, they had evasion, collection, and resource management as core dynamics. Presumably because of the torch with its dwindling radius.
I would argue that they're still both there. So you've got effectively your light level is the resource that you're trying to manage. Which I guess is why that will sort of tie back into why they said it was survival, right? Because you've got the light level that's dwindling that you're trying to keep up by collecting stuff. So okay, fine, I can see the argument behind that.
Yeah. So they've said that they decided to focus on evasion by reducing the importance of the other two. So they made it so you don't die after running out of light. So you can keep going, but you've just got very little vision. And to focus more on evasion, they decided to keep a mainly linear level design, going from point to point with larger rooms containing enemies. So they wanted to try and take out the path plan. Sorry, they wanted to try and remove all of the kind of path planning that would normally be required and instead focus on just avoiding the enemies. And
I can see their logic behind that, but I don't think it's had the effect that they were hoping for necessarily.
I think that would have worked in a game where where the vision was at a normal level. But so although they've maybe limited the size of the rooms and the number of paths, because they've also limited your vision so much, those two effects have kind of cancelled each other out.
Yeah, to a degree. Okay, so where would a satisfactory be on the mark scheme, say?
A satisfactory would be feedback was articulated and some changes have been made with partial success.
And okay, so given that, so their feedback was sort of try and reduce the competing dynamics at play. They've taken some steps to try and attempt that. I think I've hit a small bug there. So yeah, they've had some success, I think. Not necessarily full success, and perhaps they've not taken that feedback to sort of the full as they've not acted on it in as fully as perhaps they could have. There are certain other changes they could have made. So, like we've already said, with sort of balancing the different competing elements to really emphasize, for example, if it was evasion that they were going for, perhaps having some of these flying monsters like actually chasing you through the level or something like that, to really emphasize the dynamic they were going for. But otherwise, yeah, I think they've done a satisfactory job there.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
I think I agree with that.
Let's move on to our next game. Okay, and our next game is Space Destroyer 3001. Now, we've had to open this one in the Unity editor, but we'll see how it goes. So, tutorial 1.
I've got a script missing in the bottom left.
Ignore that. It'll be fine, I'm sure. Welcome to the... you're almost ready to do... But for... Okay. Have a go at... So this is going very, very fast. I've already not...
Oh, I assumed you were moving that along manually. Nope. Ooh.
Okay, so I'm not moving myself forwards. I'm just moving myself... Try and avoid the asteroid, reach the checkpoint.
That is very stark lighting.
It's space, you know?
Yeah, no, it's...
Hooray! I did it. Completed tutorial 1. Okay. Tutorial 2. Now you can fly the ship. Time to shoot with it. Press space to fire the lasers. Find and destroy all 3 asteroids in the universe.
It's a very tidy universe.
Okay, I love that. So they have sound effects for their laser, and I'm pretty sure that it's just them with a microphone going pew.
Oh my god,
that's amazing. I love it.
I've never been so sad I couldn't hear the audio.
Looks like you got lost. Have another. Okay, apparently I got lost in the universe. I don't think I got lost. I was shooting at an asteroid. But okay, they've tried to constrain the playfield to make sure that. Okay. I don't know if I got all 3 there, but fine.
Maybe they didn't like reset the level. Maybe they just shunted you back towards one of them.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense. This one doesn't seem to be exploding. Oh, even the explosion noises are all done by that. That's great. Okay, so let's start with the mark scheme. So overall aesthetics.
So first comes with the presentation. So for this, it's about is the important information shown, are the graphics consistent, and is the audio used well? And from the sound of things, the audio is used well.
So I am enjoying the audio immensely, although I am going to turn it down just a scooch as I'm talking to you, and just so it doesn't come up too much on YouTube. I wouldn't say it's necessarily consistent with the rest of the game. Like it's a cool thing to do, and if you've got no sound effects, making them yourself in a pinch is a really good idea. There are lots of free sort of sound effects out there, particularly laser noises and things like that, which may have fitted better, like the overall theme. But that said, I do appreciate that they've put them in. So, graphics-wise, the asteroids are all relatively low poly. The ship and the view of the ship is kind of weird, but that might just be because it's a camera angle I'm not used to. And the skybox
the actual ship model, I think, is a lot more realistic than the asteroids.
Yeah, so I wouldn't say that all of the sort of visuals and audio are necessarily consistent. okay, in terms of information design, we've got the score, which every time we destroy something, it shows us exactly how much it's gone up by. Or, yeah. If we destroy it, it goes up. Or, sorry, if we shoot it, it goes up.
The main question I have with that is, like, from your perspective playing it, how easy is it to spot, like, how much the score is going up by, or that it's going up?
Not hugely, but it's perhaps not that crucial.
Okay.
What else have we got? So we've got the high score as well that we can sort of see, which is kind of nice. It's kind of interesting that that updates in real time, or as we're playing, rather than anything else. We've got our health. We've also got a little audio cue for when we're taking damage. It might be nice if there was some sort of indicator that we were actually hitting this asteroid, because I'm sort of pouring lasers into them and there's nothing to suggest that it's actually taking damage. But it does explode eventually, so there's that. And so I don't know if, for example, I'm assuming that the bigger asteroids have larger health bars, so that's where I guess the challenge comes from. It's like, okay, if I point myself towards a really big asteroid, can I destroy it before I crash into it? Oh, okay, that asteroid's moving now.
Yeah. What I will say is I had not noticed that there was health until you said there was.
Okay.
So I think it might be the case that maybe the stuff as it's presented on screen is like maybe a little bit too small compared to the screen as a whole, but
perhaps, but it's also not intrusive.
To be fair, like I'm watching this in a reduced window.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's fine when in a normal window. So okay, so what would let's start with a satisfactory. What would a satisfactory be for presentation?
So satisfactory would be key information is shown, consistent graphics, and some audio, effects or music.
So the key information is definitely shown. I'm possibly going to be mean and say I don't think the graphics are thoroughly consistent. But there is definitely use of audio, and again, while not consistent, I'm enjoying it.
Yeah.
So what about a good?
So good would be that key information is shown clearly, graphics are consistent, and appropriate use of audio. And I guess like this is so while, as you said, the audio's you've got a sound for when you're hit by the asteroids. And for when you're firing the lasers and stuff, all of which is appropriate use, but it doesn't necessarily fit with the rest of the game very well.
Yeah,
so
and I think like some of the sort of key information that's perhaps not shown is, sort of like some indication of how much health these asteroids have left.
The other thing, again, it's maybe easier for you playing it, but from my perspective, it's very difficult to tell like what the bounds of the ship are, like when you're going to hit things and if you're turning, like whether you're at risk of bumping into things.
Yeah, I was about to say that, like I don't know where the camera is placed on that ship. There could be an entire tanker behind me that I can't see, that I have to be wary of. So perhaps, a slightly more zoomed back camera, so like a sort of proper third person, I guess, kind of thing, rather than necessarily first, but I guess that's kind of what they're going for, right, is first person asteroids.
Yeah, I guess.
Okay, so I think
the main thing with that is that it's not, I guess, because there's no like cockpit view or anything. It's not clear whether this is like you're inside the pilot or you're just a little bit outside. But I think it's probably meant to be first person.
Yeah, but anyway, I think we're kind of quibbling at this stage. I would say this probably fits quite nicely between satisfactory and good.
Yeah, I think I'd be happy with that. Like, again, I can't hear exactly what the audio is like, but I think the inconsistencies that are there aren't by any means ruining the game.
Like that's the thing. They definitely don't fit with the sort of slightly spacey background music and the fact that we're in a spaceship like exploding asteroids. But I kind of appreciate that they went to the trouble of putting them in. So yeah,
Okay.
so overall gameplay, so set of mechanics, meaningful play.
And smooth controls.
Yeah, so the controls are, again, slightly odd because I have no control over the speed of the ship, as far as I can tell. I can just sort of pitch and turn and things like that, which is kind of odd. It'd be nice to be able to go faster or slower, but I guess they don't want to get into a situation where I just sit still in one place and like just spin around shooting everything. Which is exactly how I normally play Asteroids.
Yeah, so I guess from that point of view, that would then depend on like whether the asteroids themselves have motion or whether they're sat still.
So some of them definitely do.
Okay.
But this sort of leads me on to what I was about to say about meaningful play, in that I'm not making a huge amount of interesting choices here, I'm just pointing towards the next biggest asteroid that I can see and spamming the spacebar and hoping that it disappears before I hit it. Like there's like sort of tying back into what we were saying about the information design, it's not obvious if there's an asteroid about to just swipe me from behind and I've got no way of seeing or avoiding that. So I'm just sort of, like I say, pointing towards like the next biggest asteroid and firing. So I'm not sure how much, like there's definitely play, but it's not super meaningful. So perhaps we look at this again, sort of start at the satisfactory on the mark scheme and see where we go from there.
So satisfactory is that game is playable, so that's the bugs one, sorry. A set of mechanics and usable controls that leads to some meaningful play.
And to me that sort of feels exactly where it is.
Yeah, I definitely don't think it's below that. Like pass is significantly so the pass, for instance, would be fewer inconsistent mechanics, challenging controls, and limited meaningful play. So I definitely don't think it's that low down.
But yeah, to get above that, what would
so good is that the game is playable. Sorry, I keep reading.
That's still the wrong one.
Good is that there is a set of complementary mechanics, smooth usable controls that lead to meaningful play.
And yeah, I was going to say, I think that's the other thing that sort of maybe prevents them from getting all the way to the good, is that there's a relatively limited set of mechanics. There's move and shoot, and asteroids seem to sort of spawn in at random, like exactly just there that we saw. It's not like, you know, in the classic asteroid where it splits into two smaller ones, and then two smaller ones, and so on and so on. So you have to do some planning about how and where it's going to split, and then avoid it.
Yeah.
So I would say this is probably firmly satisfactory for gameplay. And similarly, when we're looking at bugs, the complexity of the game I think might be a bit of a hindrance here. So I've not noticed any particular bugs. But
yeah, so starting at satisfactory would be that the game is playable and is reasonably complex, but there are infrequent serious bugs and or frequent minor bugs. To go up from that, there would have to be only uncommon minor bugs, which I think, in terms of bugs, as you said, there doesn't seem to be any.
So I guess how complex do we feel the game is? I mean, we've got moving, we've got shooting. I think in terms of complexity, perhaps we partially give them the benefit of the doubt for this, because I think the thing that is mostly an issue here, I guess, and something that's going to crop up later in the mark theme, is the level design.
So one thing that I will say is will come up later when we're talking about feedback, but they did previously have more mechanics present in the game that they have removed.
Interesting.
Which,
I mean, we'll get to that when we get to that. For now, I would say, based on sort of perhaps the complexity or lack thereof, we make this a satisfactory or possibly a notch above. What do you think?
I guess they do have the increasing... Well, they say it's increasing difficulty with the asteroids becoming denser as time moves on. Or possibly as your score increases, I'm not sure. But yeah, okay, I think satisfactory.
Okay. Cool, so let's move on to how well they fulfilled the brief. So level design and the way they've tutorialized it. So this is the thing. I don't think they have a designed level. They have some space with some asteroids floating in it. Now that's not entirely fair. They have designed the progression of it. So they've got this difficulty thing that increases over time or score, we're not sure which, and that increases the density of the asteroids. And I'm assuming how many of them are moving as well.
So,
but other than that, there's not a lot of design.
Of the asteroids isn't actually that they're. I think what's happening is when the asteroids spawn in, if they overlap with existing asteroids, it kind of bumps them apart, and that causes them to move.
Ah, is that what you said? Okay.
Because I've noticed a couple of times, like when a new asteroid spawns in, the ones around it kind of shift away from it.
So is that might be a happy quirk of the physics engine, or it might be something done deliberately?
Yeah.
Okay, but yeah. So
and again, it's hard to tell because they seem to be spawning in randomly. Like, they might not be random. They might have put some thought into where they're going, but it seems to be totally random where the asteroids come in.
Yeah. So okay, what would a satisfactory on the mark scheme be for this?
Satisfactory would be a sensible level design that demonstrates some of the mechanics with an attempt at pacing and some goals, risks, and rewards.
And this is the thing.
I mean, they've clearly got an attempt at pacing.
They have the attempt at pacing, but there's a limited set of mechanics on display just because I think there's a limited set of mechanics. Yeah. And there's no real goal, risk, or reward.
I think they've got the goals because, the score's going up, but there's definitely not really any kind of risks other than, if you don't shoot the asteroids, you might crash into them.
I guess I mean
but you can also easily just turn away from it.
Yeah, I guess I mean there's no immediate goal. Like we're not driven to. Like our ultimate goal is get more points, but we get points by just shooting asteroids, and we're in a field full of asteroids. So I'm almost inclined to say this is perhaps a bit lower than that. So what would a pass be?
So a pass would be a level design that demonstrates some of the mechanics, but poorly balanced or paced, and with a lack of clarity over goals, risks, and rewards.
I don't think there's a lack of clarity, I just think that there's a lack of meaningful decisions to be made.
Yeah. So I think... So, like, as an example of another way that this could have been approached, for instance, if, with the asteroid spawning, they'd restricted it so it can't spawn asteroids within your field of view, then eventually, right, you get to this kind of point where you've destroyed most of the asteroids in front of you, and you would then have to actively seek out more. But at the moment, like, you're going forwards, and you destroy some, and then more just appear directly in front of you, so you don't really need to make any decisions to adjust. It's just, okay, there's the next nearest asteroid.
And that's the thing, there's barely any sort of in my field of view that are moving at all, so I don't have to worry about avoiding any. And any that are moving behind me I can't see, so I can't really account for anyway.
Yeah.
So I mean, obviously there are definitely a lot of things you could have done to sort of improve those goals, risks, and rewards. So just like asteroids of a different colour. So gold ones are worth more because they're full of gold. So it's a case of do I seek those out, and do I like hunt those ones down in particular? Things like that.
Yeah. So
or like deliberately have.
What they've done is made the larger asteroids worth more. Yeah. So, which is interesting. Obviously, I imagine it's more work to destroy, but it might have even been a better idea to make the small asteroids worth more because they're harder to hit.
Yeah. Okay. So actually, now that you've said that, I'm going to say there is some goals, risks, and rewards in the. I think I touched on it at the start actually as well. Like I point myself at a big asteroid and I hope that I can destroy it before I hit it, basically. So it's limited, but there is some notion of risk reward, I guess. So perhaps we be generous and say satisfactory for this.
I guess there's one last thing I'm curious about. In the tutorial level, you got shunted back onto the map because you went too far out. There doesn't seem to be any bounds on the map in this one.
Well, I think that's because we have like an infinite field of asteroids, whereas in that one there were 3 specific asteroids that we had to get.
Yeah, okay. I just wanted to, because I wasn't sure if maybe
I mean, I will try flying in a single direction.
And I haven't
and we'll see what happens. But okay, so let's decide on a mark for this and then move on.
Yes. I would probably put it a notch below satisfactory, and like partly because, for instance, just then you were going towards an asteroid and shooting at it, and another massive one kind of drifted in front of your view and although it didn't hit you, like there was no way of really anticipating or avoiding that. You're just floating along and an asteroid flies in front of you, which...
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. Okay, so let's put it between pass and satisfactory and move on to talk about the tutorial design.
Yes.
So, again, because there's kind of a limited set of mechanics available, there's a limited set of things to tutorialize. And similarly for the goals, risks, and reward, that's not a thing we're tutorialized. It's a thing that we've sort of had to more or less sort of piece together ourselves. So if I can...
I guess the goals were tutorialized because we were given, here's some asteroids, go shoot. But definitely not like the difference in score wasn't because like all the asteroids we were presented with were the same size.
So remember, the tutorial is sort of given to us basically entirely in text that scrolls past very, very fast as well.
Yeah.
And also in this, the first goal we're given is get to this hoop, but that's not what the goal is in the game.
Yeah. And like... So they need to obviously teach you that hitting asteroids is bad.
Well, they need to teach you movement, and okay,
yes.
Getting us to fly through a set of hoops, probably fine. I feel like that asteroid is far too close for that hoop as well, but...
Yeah. And if you wanted to teach the player that, like, if you get hit by asteroids, it hurts you, it probably would have been a better idea to have an asteroid spawn in flying towards you that you have to actively avoid.
Yeah. I mean, sort of, in a way, you could sort of collapse both those tutorials into just this one, because you have to move and, like, you have to move to find the asteroids and then shoot them. But again, the thing is, in this, the tutorial is so limited just because there's so little to teach. So, of the mechanics they've got, yeah, that's a reasonable way of doing it, except for this, again, sort of just a whole bunch of text that goes past too quickly before the player can read or absorb it.
Actually, yeah, I think I agree with you that for that, I would probably have condensed those down into one, and rather than starting with here's the movement, because you start going forward, I would have started with here's an asteroid in front of you, destroy it, and then now you have to move to find the others. This is how you turn.
Okay, so what would a satisfactory for a tutorial be?
Satisfactory would be a partly integrated tutorial that communicates some goals, risks, and rewards through level design and introduces most information and mechanics in a logical way.
So, I guess first, do we think it's integrated?
No.
Yeah.
Like, I think the second one is more so because, again, it's just essentially a very small version of the main game where there's only 3 asteroids. But that first one, it has a completely different goal to the rest of the game, and also, like, those hoops you never see again.
Again, which is sort of... Like, that's fine, because it's getting the player to prove they've understood a mechanic. Like, we might have done it differently, but okay, that bit I will say is fine. Like, the issue, I think, is the... Like, I guess the sort of text and the speed with which it sort of goes past. So I did notice that time playing through it, they lock the controls while the text is going on, and then they unlock them when they say, now use the arrow keys to do this. So there is some sort of integration between what the player is allowed to do and what they're being tutorialized.
I'm not sure that that's necessarily a good thing. Because if, for instance, you've got a player who's someone who's used to playing these kind of games, they might well guess that the arrow keys move. And so when you dump them in, they might initially just hit them to see what they do, and if they don't do anything, they might, say, assume that it's a different movement control, and then that text's going very fast, so it's possible they'd end up convincing themselves the arrow keys don't control the movement, and then missing the movement controls.
That is true. Okay, so what would a pass level be for a tutorial level?
So the pass is a tutorial that communicates some goals, risks, and rewards, and that introduces some information and mechanics in a logical way.
And it's sort of we're back to the fact that there aren't a huge amount of mechanics available to to tutorialize?
Yeah.
Okay, so
I think based on the descriptions, it definitely fits past better than any of the others. And again, like stuff like the fact that this text is scrolling so fast, I think like it is quite a strong point against it, because like they've got this nice font that fits the theme of the game very well, but it's not necessarily the easiest to read. So if you've got someone playing this who, for whatever reason, is going to be reading a bit slower than the developers anticipate, they would.
So shall we say it's a pass, or between a pass and a satisfactory?
I'd probably put it at a pass.
I think I would agree. Again, sort of the tutorial that they've got is... I would say the tutorial that they've got is satisfactory, but there's not enough of it to fully demonstrate that they've...
I guess... Because also they don't actually do anything, like they don't in any way make sure that you know that how the health system works, or that if you hit it, it will kill you. Like during the tutorial, you can get through that entire thing without...
I mean, they do say avoid the asteroids, right? They don't have to show you dying, but I see where you're coming from.
And then like the actual format of this main game, where it goes on indefinitely, get as many points as you can, and the difficulty, like none of that is explained. And although after the first playthrough you'll get, okay, it just keeps going, asteroids become denser. On a first playthrough, it's not clear if there is an actual like end goal.
Okay, so let's mark that down as a pass and move on to what they think what they've said is the core dynamic and how well the mechanics support it.
Don't think we'll be surprised to learn that they think their core dynamic is destruction.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sort of struggling to see what else it could be. So a lot of the fun of the game is in shooting the things. I feel like they could have maybe had more to really emphasize that is the fun bit. They have their lovely sound effects of something, an explosion when one of these things is destroyed, but perhaps like a sort of a small particle effect as it explodes or whatever, or
even like a little ding.
Yeah, or a different set of weapons that we can use to destroy things, like, I don't know, 2 lasers or a missile or something like that. Because if the fun part of the game is supposed to be destruction, you want to give the player as many sort of rewards for destroying stuff as possible to let them destroy more stuff.
So one thing that they've mentioned in here, and that I want to talk a bit about, is that they've said that although the spaceship has health and can be destroyed, the main focus of the game is to attack asteroids rather than defend against them. I guess they're implying that it could be confused for survival. But I think you could argue a pretty strong case for this being a survival game, given that
the goal is sort of...
your score is going to correlate with how long you've been playing. And, like, if you want to get a high score, you're just going to have to avoid being destroyed by asteroids for a long time. So it would probably, in a lot of situations, be a better idea to move out of the way of an asteroid you've been destroying so that it doesn't blow you up.
So I agree. I think I would say it's probably more destruction than survival, because we're not searching for stuff to, build up a depleting resource, as we've talked about before. We are, like, the primary loop is destroy stuff. I agree that they could have done more to emphasize that, though, but the mechanics that they've got, like move around, shoot, they support it. So, but again, it goes back to there's a slightly limited set of mechanics perhaps, and slightly not as much emphasis on the destruction as there could be. But what would we say would a satisfactory be? Or what would it take for something to hit satisfactory on a mark scheme?
Satisfactory is a core dynamic that is... Wait, am I reading that right? Core dynamic, satisfactory. Yeah, okay. A core dynamic that is a poor match for the theme of the game, or is supported by only some of the mechanics and visual choices. Audio-visual choices.
And a good would be...
Good would be a clear core dynamic that suits the theme of the game and that is well supported by the primary mechanics and mostly appropriate audio-visual choices.
And I would say it probably comes close to that.
Yeah, I think...
In fact, I would argue that actually it does hit that. So we can sort of split hairs about, there's not enough mechanics for it to hit that, but we've already covered that in other portions of the scheme. Like the mechanics that they've got and the audio-visual choices they've made support it. They could have been made better, which is why it's not an excellent. With more explosion effects or more variety of mechanics to underline it, but the mechanics that they have got fit.
Yeah, no, I think I'd be happy with that.
Okay, so last thing on the
they've
box.
not really done anything. They've not done much that actively works against the core dynamic for certain.
Okay, so last thing on the mark scheme is sort of their feedback. So you mentioned this earlier. What did they say for their feedback portion?
So, the first piece of feedback they have is that they needed to make sure the goal was clear, because as there's no end to the level, you need to make sure the player understands that the goal is to destroy as much as they can.
Okay.
And so their response is that they've used the second tutorial level to show the player their score increasing when the asteroids are destroyed.
I will be honest, I'm not sure I noticed that in the tutorial, but okay, that's a change they've made.
They've said that they've made it so that when the asteroids are destroyed, you get that little green plus label below the score to show you that it's a positive action.
Okay.
And then they've added a high score to further incentivize gaining score and providing a target. And
that bit I will say, that's probably a positive change. Like, can I destroy more stuff this time than I did last time?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think.
So you mentioned something about they'd taken out mechanics.
Yes. So the other one is that apparently they used to have magnetized asteroids that would actively move towards the player. And they were told that it was difficult to tell that those asteroids were intentionally moving towards the player because of the point of view and the fact that everything on screen is moving towards you anyway.
Ah, okay.
And so their response was to remove them.
Interesting.
As they said,
I would say
their justification.
Okay, go ahead.
Is that they weren't working the way they had intended. And when they went to add the actual asteroid models, they found it was too difficult to distinguish between the two types of asteroid.
Okay, I can see why they've done that. And sometimes, in a development cycle, that's just what you have to do. If a feature isn't working and you don't have time to fully fix it, then you should just cut it. It's better to have less features than more bad features. I will say, if they'd managed to get that working, though, that would have solved a lot of the issues that we were talking about. It would have had a much more clear goal risk reward cycle. Do we sort of take out these magnetic asteroids first to prevent them sort of chasing us, or do we go for perhaps the higher scoring asteroids instead, kind of thing? And it also would have given them more stuff to tutorialize. If they'd have had tutorial level 3 that just says this is a magnetic asteroid, it will follow your ship, that might even be enough. But okay,
so I'm torn on this one because while on the one hand, as we've said, there's not a huge amount of mechanics in the game as it is, and so having this extra thing would have probably made it a lot more interesting and enjoyable. That would have been a good thing. And again, although this is obviously meant to be themed around destroying asteroids, they could have gone around this by just saying it's not an asteroid, it's like a ship that flies towards you or something.
Yeah, perhaps. So okay.
On the other hand, though, I think that if you had some kind of enemy that actively moves towards you and tries to destroy you, that probably would have pushed it more towards survival again, because now you've got a thing that you're trying, or even arguably chase and evade.
Okay, perhaps, but let's focus on the actual feedback and their actual actions on it. So
yes,
what did they? So a satisfactory would be.
Sorry, satisfactory would be feedback was articulated and some changes have been made with partial success.
And a good would be?
Good would be that feedback was articulated and reasonable changes have been successfully made.
So here's the thing. I think they've articulated their feedback well, and perhaps they've made the best changes that they could have done within their time, even if they weren't necessarily the best changes that could have been made. So I'm inclined to say that it's between satisfactory and good for that reason.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think overall it is, as you said, it's definitely a better idea to just remove a feature that might make the game worse.
That's the thing. It was definitely a successful change, assuming that feature didn't work. It wasn't like fixing it. Obviously, would have been better, and that would have gotten them higher up in the feedback thing for addressing that issue more fully. But just removing it was a successful change. So I will say between satisfactory and good.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Let's move on to our next game, and our next game is Puzzle Dash. So we've got a controls thing, which, okay. So this is not a tutorial, but perhaps this is just a reference for us to look at. I will say this maybe perhaps even complicates things, because I don't feel I can remember all of this and then jump into the game. So we'll see how they tutorialize stuff from within the gameplay. Okay. WASD to move. It's interesting that I had to move to be able to see that. And then Control W to slide. So if I just press Control, so I can't just crouch and move. I have to slide, and then space to jump. Try sliding down the ramp.
Ooh.
Okay. So there's a ramp back up here if you mess up. Oh, that's kind of nice actually. I like that.
Yeah, so from my perspective, it's everything is moving a little bit too fast for the stream to keep up with. So
okay. I will say it's moving a little bit too fast for me to keep up with, but I mean, I guess that's kind of like the dynamic isn't the right word here, but the sort of the vibe they're going for is, sort of fast and fluid movement and things like that. So given that this is our first time playing through, we're probably not going to be super good, but I bet if I did that again I could get through all of that in one motion.
I'm definitely getting strong Mirror's Edge vibes from this.
Yeah, so we got some sort of slowish techno in the background. So use mouse scroll to move an obstacle. So I'm scrolling my mouse and nothing is happening.
Maybe you have to pick it up first?
Yeah, and clicking it doesn't seem to do anything either. Oh, but I can just... Oh, okay, so you pick it up, and so I assumed it was like press middle mouse to just push this thing away from you.
Right.
So that wasn't super clear.
But it's more like, that you can change how far away something you're holding is.
Yeah, so if it had said, when holding, you scroll to move it away from you, that would have made that clearer, but okay. Try stacking objects. You can rotate with left or right mouse click. Okay, so this has gone from like a parkour game to a stacking blocks game.
Yes.
Which
it's been a very
okay, like
strong change of pace.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like it really fits with the aesthetic that they introduced us to, but I can't.
But I guess if we're still in the tutorial space, and this is just them introducing these, maybe they all come together.
Ooh, the rotation's very weird, and I think I just...
Did that just disappear?
I think I just yeeted it into the void, yeah. So yeah, the controls are slightly weird, so look at this. So if I right-click, it rotates this way.
Okay.
And if I left-click, it rotates this way. And we're back. Okay, so yeah. Oh, I almost made that jump without putting...
made some progress.
So yeah, so we're stacking these blocks. Like, it feels like they've got two... So I'm getting ahead of myself here. It feels like they've got two dynamics that are both very, very at odds with each other. So like, it feels like we have, say, spatial reasoning, like moving the thing so we can get around the level, and something akin to Race to the End, where it's all about moving through the level as fast and fluidly as possible.
Yeah, I think so. I think I remember talking to this group about it during one of the labs, and if I remember correctly, I think they said they wanted to try and go for a kind of parkour style game, but where you build the track before you run it. Which, ooh.
See, like that felt super cool. But now I have
It looked cool.
Now I have to put something on this button. So I have to go down here, sort of interrupt the flow of that super cool movement. Click button to respond Q. You can parkour while holding small objects. I don't know why it's off to the right there though. Every time I pick it up, it leaps to the right.
I wonder if they've done that to try and like emulate you're holding it in your right hand. Yeah. So it's not in the way of the parkour.
Also, it says
so you can still see where you're going.
So it says press F to throw, but why do I need to throw it? I can just put it down here, right? Okay, so we're sort of getting ahead of ourselves a little bit, I guess. Let's start with the overall presentation, the information design, and that kind of thing.
Okay. So for the presentation,
I have to quit straight out. That's a shame. It'd be nice if there was a replay button there.
So for the presentation, a good would be that key information is shown clearly, graphics are consistent, and appropriate use of audio. As far as the graphics go, I think they're consistent.
Yeah, again, sort of minimal, slightly abstract, but in kind of like a Mirror's Edge kind of way, right? It's sort of putting the focus on
kind of Portal style of everything is these same 6 types of panel.
Yeah, we are in some sort of test chamber or whatever. Okay, so that's kind of interesting. Again, sort of a mechanic that's not really used. Again, getting ahead of myself, but mentioning it now just so I can come back to it later. So it's not just put box on switch, it's put right coloured box on switch. Yeah. So the music's nice. Again, it's sort of like got a relatively.
Actually, while we're in that room, there's a point which is that if you take the box off that switch, does it close the door again?
No.
No. Okay. Well, that door was like a red rectangle, which at a glance looks identical to the obstacle in the next room.
That is a good point.
So, although I don't think we had an issue with that the first time we ran through, I can imagine a situation where someone sees that and then gets to the next room and think, oh, there's another door. How do I make the door open? Where's the switch? It's not the biggest issue, but it is just a potential point of confusion.
I found a way of getting around this without putting down any blocks.
That's cool.
Hang on. I'm just going to totally avoid the level here.
Okay. I imagine that's not intentional. Because they've gone for that very clear, all of the points where you're supposed to do wall running are yellow.
Yeah, but like here, for example, like I could do a cool wall run all the way around, or I can just stand here and just chuck that up there.
Okay.
If I wasn't such
Maybe
a rubbish
you can't quite chuck it far enough.
Okay. Fair enough. Anyway, overall aesthetic still. Information design. It's clear what's a button. It's not necessarily clear what's a door. It's clear where they intend you to wall run. It's clear what a cube is.
And that's not quite so clear.
You can, but it's still painting like a path through the level. So.
Yeah, I guess if it's just a kind of, hey, this is an indication of where you probably should go.
Yeah, like that's
you can find other places.
Then they're definitely not intending for me to bypass this entire level by doing that. So it's not a case of I can only wall run on those, but just that's sort of the intended path, which, you know, that's fine. So yeah. So what would a good be?
So good would be key information is shown clearly, graphics are consistent, and appropriate use of audio, which apparently there's some techno playing.
And there is some sound either when we pick up a cube or when a cube lands on a box. I haven't been able to determine. but there's
Okay.
there's some sound effects as well, not a huge amount, but
So I guess, do you think the sounds are appropriate and well used?
I would say probably. So there we go. There's basically a sound effect when you sort of pick up and move one of these large boxes,
Right.
and when you're rotating it as well. I think.
Okay.
Oh no, just when you're holding it. Okay. I don't think it needs much else. So yeah.
No, I guess, like, for something like this, the only thing I can think of where maybe you might want additional sound. You might want maybe a jumping effect.
Yeah.
Or potentially something when you're going really fast, some kind of like whooshing noise.
Yeah.
To kind of emphasize that a bit more.
Okay.
But I don't think that's so much of them misusing audio. Just there's potentially more.
So I think it solidly hits good. Do we think it hits excellent?
So excellent would be key information is shown clearly, consistent and appealing graphics, and good use of audio. I mean,
I think it probably hits that.
I like the look of it.
Like, it's definitely appealing.
Yeah. Particularly the fact that they've used this.
I think
it's a very like source debug texture look.
It's clear what's furniture, if you like, and what's a movable cube. It's clear where they intend us to do the wall running. Like you say, maybe they could have done more with the audio, but otherwise I'm inclined to say, yeah, it probably hits the excellent.
I would say maybe a little bit below excellent, just because of that, like...
The issue with the door and the cube kind of thing.
Yeah, there's a couple of tiny things. Like there's maybe a bit more audio that door could have been a bit confusing. At the start, for instance, you mentioned that some of the tutorial text is pointing the wrong way, it seems.
Yeah, okay, true. Alright, in which case let's call it between good and excellent, and then move on to the next bit, which is the overall gameplay. So, is there risk-reward? Is there meaningful play? So, there is a clear goal, which is just to progress through the level. There's not a huge amount of risk-reward. And again, sort of one of the ways that we sort of talk about how you could introduce that into these types of puzzle games is, if there's, for example, well, basically a scoring system. So either there's bits for reaching different bits of the levels or for getting through it faster, depending on what you want your core dynamic to be.
Or even maybe using like fewer of these platforms. It's something that you see occasionally. Yeah. So if you can get through that room, for instance, as you've already done, without using any of the blocks.
So some kind of scoring system to emphasize that goal risk reward thing would be ideal. But otherwise, like, the controls are relatively not even relatively smooth. They're very nice. Your run speed's a little bit fast initially, but once you get the hang of it, it controls really nicely.
I guess like you did mention that maybe the rotation controls are a bit confusing at first, but
actually, those are.
They don't seem like they're going to be super important either, so maybe that's not the worst thing.
Yeah, I feel like there's definitely a better way you could have done that. Okay, so what would a good for gameplay be?
So good is a set of complementary mechanics and smooth usable controls that lead to meaningful play.
And I think we're definitely there. What would an excellent be?
So an excellent is a wide set of complementary mechanics, intuitive and smooth usable controls that lead to enjoyable and meaningful play.
So do they have a wide set of mechanics? What have they got? They've got movement, they've got jumping, they've got sliding, they've got...
There's the wall running.
There's
picking up,
moving these things. They've got boxes with switches.
Yeah. You can also throw the objects, which, although they don't really use it in this level, I can definitely imagine you'd be able to set up cool puzzles where you have to do interesting parkour stuff and then throw boxes into switches as you're going past them.
So I think that's going to be a big theme of while we talk about this, in that there's a lot of interesting mechanics, but they're not necessarily all used to greatest effect. Like, for example, the sort of sliding and like then leaping into action, the throwing the cubes and things like that. It's But overall, I would say again, the controls, yeah, smooth, intuitive, that all seems to work, other than the moving the box around. So I think maybe some of those things prevent it necessarily from fully reaching excellent, but again, between the two, do you reckon?
Yeah, I definitely think between the two.
Cool. So bugs. Haven't necessarily noticed bugs. There's perhaps this, I don't know whether you'd call this a bug, or perhaps a flaw in the level
it's not
design.
clear whether that's...
Like, it's definitely not intended. But otherwise...
Well, I guess there's a difference between, like, is it that that's not maybe the route that was designed for most players to go, or is it they didn't want you to do this?
A way of letting you skip the tutorial.
This is the kind of game where maybe it would be actively good to have alternate routes that, say, speedrunners could take. And so, although it might not be the intended way, if it's still like this is a valid way of solving it.
Okay.
I guess without knowing
that's it.
whether they wanted you to do this, we can't see whether it's a bug.
Let's call it a dominant strategy then, rather than a bug. So, in terms of bugs, reasonable complexity. So, like moving, rotating cubes, like moving through the level, the different wall running and stuff. So I was just about to try and demonstrate that. Occasionally, when you're wall running, you can just stop on the wall, which to me feels really odd. Like, it feels like when your speed drops to a certain thing, it should, you should just fall off. But perhaps I'm clinging or gripping onto the wall. So again, certainly not a serious bug, more just a sort of slight odd behaviour to me. But otherwise, so where would a good be for bugs?
So a good would be the game is playable and is reasonably complex, and there are only minor bugs, and these are uncommon.
I think we might even be above that.
Yeah, particularly the only things that I think could count as bugs also potentially could be intended. It's just hard to tell because we haven't been told whether they are or not.
Yeah.
So an excellent would be that the game is playable and reasonably complex and there are no obvious bugs. Which I don't think we can say because some of these might be bugs.
Yeah, so I'm inclined to say let's ignore the fact that we can just bypass this level, because that's, if you like, a failure of level design rather than a programming bug.
Yeah.
Honestly, again, even the sort of sticking to a wall thing, again, sort of difficult to say. It might be an intentional design choice. So I guess the rest is...
And I guess if that is an intentional design choice, then that's more of a, like, they didn't teach us that, so it's that would be a tutorial issue rather than a bug issue.
Yeah. Okay. So perhaps so excellent or between good and excellent.
I would be tempted here to give them the benefit of the doubt and say that both of these slightly odd wall running behaviors are intentional. Okay,
cool. In which case, let's say excellent, and let's move on to how they met the brief. So starting with the level design.
For this, good would be a sensible level design that demonstrates a number of mechanics with good pacing and some goals, risks, and rewards.
So I think it hits everything.
Sorry.
Except
some clear goals, risks.
The risks, rewards bit.
Yeah. That is really the only thing there, is there's no...
Like, the goal is a very obvious moving through the level. Like, it's very clear the direction that we should be moving at all times. That's fine. There's no risk, though, because we can't die. We can just get stuck in a puzzle. And there's no reward system that sort of lets us... again, so we sort of talked about, either a timer or a sort of collectibles or a use fewest blocks to complete level kind of thing.
So I kind of want to play devil's advocate here and say that...
Of course you do, go ahead.
Although there's no, for example, score or timer, you can argue that there are rewards, but they're like more intrinsic rewards. Like the reward, for instance, for bypassing this room by wall running isn't that you get more points, it's that it feels more like it's more fun. The player feels cooler doing it.
Given that we've already said we don't think that that's intentional behaviour,
yeah,
I'm inclined to say no.
If that was an intentional, like, they definitely are allowed to run on these walls, and we want them to bypass things with that.
Let's not get too hung up.
I would argue more in favour.
What would they need for an excellent?
So an excellent is a sophisticated level design that demonstrates a wide range of mechanics with good varied pacing and balanced goals, risks, and rewards.
Okay, so I think it's safe to say I don't think they necessarily meet that. They have a number of different mechanics, but they haven't used them in combination to create sort of complex behavior like that.
Yeah.
And again, the balance between risks and rewards kind of thing. There's no like alternate paths where one is more skillful and one is more safe, if you like, other than the can you all run around the outside of the chamber. I think they're above a satisfactory, and I'm inclined to say the quality of their other things probably still leaves them at a good, even though they don't necessarily have that explicit risk reward.
Yeah.
Sound fair?
So the satisfactory would be sensible level design that demonstrates some mechanics with an attempt at pacing and some goals, risks, and rewards.
And I think that's the thing.
I definitely think they're better than satisfactory.
I think overall the other elements of that, even though like there isn't the explicit risk reward thing, means that they're still on a good there.
Okay.
So the next bit is the tutorial. So how have they tutorialized the mechanics? So they've got the I tell you what, I'm going to quit out of this and we'll jump straight back into it.
So while it's reloading, a good for this is a mostly integrated tutorial that communicates most goals, risks, and rewards through level design, and introduces most information and mechanics in a logical way.
So obviously we have to be able to move to continue, fine. We also have to prove that we can do the slide to continue. Again, kind of a shame that this isn't used elsewhere.
Yeah. And again, we do also have that issue of like you already need to move to see the thing telling you how to move, which is a bit of a shame.
And I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt and say, like cultural memory, if you like, of pre-existing gaming concepts. You can mostly assume that WASD and mouse will move. So being able to just reinforce that by having it written down, fine. So what would an excellent be?
So an excellent would be an integrated tutorial that communicates goals, risks, and rewards through level design, and that introduces information and mechanics in a logical way that builds on what has gone before.
And again, it's that building on what's gone before. I mean, so I guess when we get to the block puzzle, that's sort of the most evidence of that we see, where, for example, so not this one, but where
it's those last two where you have to you can stack blocks and the wall running together, and then the last one where you have to pick up blocks and do wall running again.
Yeah. So they do have that. Again, maybe not as complex as it could have been, but still. Oh, we did see a small bug earlier, didn't we, where this vanished to the floor.
Okay, so maybe we should...
Oh, there it goes again.
Okay, maybe we should retroactively bring that down.
Yeah, I think retroactively... Okay, there we go. We have observed a bug, which is, a bit of a shame, and it's not broken our game completely.
Yeah.
But focusing back on this...
So, I think... Also going back to one of the previous points to do with the bugs, where we decided that the wall running behaviors were probably intentional. But if that's the case, they haven't explained that you can wall run on other surfaces. In fact, they've told you can... I think they've tried to tell you can only wall run on the yellow things, which is...
I think that's because that is the path through the level that they have in mind. I think that the fact that you can wall run on other surfaces isn't necessarily a bug, more an oversight.
Yeah, I'm just...
Let's not get too hung up on that.
I just think, I don't think it's like, again, it's not a huge issue, just I think it's a point, like, against the tutorial design that maybe there is some stuff that hasn't been properly explained.
I see, okay.
But mostly, I think it definitely fits good.
Okay, do you think it fits excellently?
So the two things I think that go against it being excellent is that, again, you've got that issue of the goals, risks, and rewards where there just isn't really any, so they can't really fulfill that part of the brief.
Yeah,
and
like that's the thing. It's we know the goal is to get through the level, but we don't know if we're supposed to be doing it as fast as possible or
Yeah.
just solving the
And then
puzzle.
there's that other part that they just haven't. There's not that much evidence of the different mechanics being used together.
I think
There is a little bit in this room and the next one, but there's not a huge amount of that. So I would say maybe between good and excellent.
Okay, yeah, let's say that, and then let's look at the core dynamic. So this one I'm very intrigued by. What have they said
Okay.
is the core dynamic for this game? Because there's one I'm leaning towards, but I'm curious to say what they've said.
So they think that it's spatial reasoning.
And that is what I was leaning towards.
Yeah.
The problem is, I don't know if that's a good fit for all of the mechanics.
So I think, yeah, again, this comes down to the kind of lack of clear goals or explicit rewards, is that if you're not scoring them based on speed or anything, then I think this definitely fits in spatial reasoning. Because although, yeah, this kind of like jumping, sliding, wall running thing is usually used in race type games.
So here's the thing.
It totally works for spatial reasoning.
So if you take away the sort of running, sliding, wall running kind of thing, then it becomes, let's say, a fairly typical stack blocks to overcome level, whether it's by putting them on switches or piling them up so you can reach other bits.
Yeah.
Okay, fine, definitely spatial reasoning. With the other mechanics, I feel like that kind of undermines it, because those movement controls become such a sort of key point in navigating the game, that having to sort of, it feels really cool to, sort of jump, slide, wall run off a thing and, get to the end. That feels awesome. So having to stop and stack blocks feels really weird. So the way around that I can think of is, instead of all of these blocks being just down here, if there's one up on a ledge over there that I can only get to by doing a cool slide, jump, and a wall run to reach.
Right, you have to use those parkour abilities to get the puzzle pieces.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I definitely agree with that. That's okay. We found one more bug.
Yep.
I definitely agree with that. I'm not sure. I'm not sure it counts against the core dynamic though. I think that might be more of a pacing issue.
Perhaps.
The pace builds up and then it suddenly grinds to a halt, and then it gets really fast paced for a little bit, and then it suddenly grinds to a halt again.
I would still say that that core dynamic is not supported by some of the mechanics. However, most of the mechanics, it definitely is. Like buttons, blocks, moving stuff around, piling it up, solving door puzzles. Yeah, all very clearly spatial reasoning, all really builds towards it. So
on the mark scheme, good would be a clear core dynamic, suits the theme of the game, and is well supported by the primary mechanics and mostly appropriate audio-visual choices. And
there are reasons why I could say it doesn't necessarily fit that. The fact that I could argue that it doesn't, but I'm actually not going to. I'm going to say that it definitely meets that. The core dynamic, because it's a case of what do you think is the primary set of mechanics, right? If it's moving around with the cool wall running and stuff like that, then it's not. But which means the primary mechanic must be the arranging blocks and stuff.
So, I guess.
Actually, that's not entirely fair, because this wall running here is still navigating the space, so it still supports it. You're right, it's more an issue of the pacing rather than whether the mechanics support that or not. So okay, I will take that back entirely and say, yeah, it definitely fits that.
Okay. So if excellent then would be a clear core dynamic that suits the theme of the game and is well supported by an integrated set of mechanics and appropriate visual choices, and I don't think it reaches that.
Yeah, I think this is
because there's that disconnect between the block manipulation and the platforming.
Like the way the mechanics are integrated and combined with one another sort of takes away from one or other of the potential dynamics at play. So I think they hit good for spatial reasoning because the set of mechanics that they've got built towards it, but the mechanics don't build together very well. So okay, let's say that, and then let's look at the feedback they were given.
So the feedback, I remember saying this. The first point is that make sure the tutorials are simple enough for your grandma.
It's a good rule of thumb.
So I remember the initial prototype they showed, the very first room. You had to do a slide and then a jump onto a wall run around the corner, and that was their first tutorial room.
So I was going to say that even this slide and then immediate sudden jump after it is already kind of pushing it there.
But they have definitely made the tutorial slower paced and more. They've broken it up more, which is exactly what I said they should do.
Good. Okay. Any other bits of feedback that they raised?
And then the other one is that they should playtest this with people who aren't the developers to make sure that it isn't, it's actually the controls fit and the speed is good. And so they apparently got about 10 people to playtest this, some of whom were older family members. And they said it was very eye-opening to watch people interact with it from a new perspective. They haven't said how they've adapted the game based on that feedback.
Now that's kind of a shame, because I was going to say them deliberately getting other people who may not regularly play games, to try it, so they can sort of see how they act with. That's a really, really good step, and I encourage everyone on the course to try doing that. It would have been a lot nicer if they'd have said, yeah, we noticed that most people tried doing this thing, so we changed the game to to help them accomplish that. So that's kind of a shame. So this, I think, would fall under perhaps that bit at least, feedback that wasn't particularly well articulated, because they've not told us what the feedback on it was. In terms of how they dealt with the feedback you gave them, yeah, that seems totally reasonable to me. So on the mark scheme, if we look at
the last thing is they've said that they also added, in regards to the tutorials, they add that 3D text they've added in as a response to the feedback.
Okay. Because they just had the controls list at the start, didn't they?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm very glad they added that then. Okay.
So on the mark scheme, good would be feedback was articulated and reasonable changes have been successfully made. Which I think they fit. That second bit with the testing, they didn't say what they changed, which is a shame. If they hadn't done that and they just had that one piece of feedback, I think that would satisfy good.
That's the thing, yeah. Without if they'd only had that bit of feedback that says we tested it and then changed the game, that would be poorly articulated feedback. But the rest of it was fine. And in particular, so that one note about, yes, we added some text into our tutorial, that massively upped their tutorial mark, if nothing else, right? If we'd have had to just memorize that set of controls and then figure out how it worked in the level, they would have definitely done a lot poorer there. So I think the fact that we can immediately say that is a successful change. So
so
go ahead.
Potentially, then, would you say potentially means excellent?
You tell me. What's the criteria for excellent?
So that'd be feedback was clearly articulated, interpreted, and reasonable changes have been successfully made.
So I'm not sure I'd go quite that far, because it's that sort of, again, that understanding and interpretation of the feedback. So and their articulation of how they did that. So they've definitely made some changes, and it's obvious that those changes were good changes. But they haven't necessarily gone beyond those.
And again, that second point of feedback definitely doesn't fit the clearly articulated
that's true.
Category. So maybe halfway between or just good?
I think we stick with good for this. Okay. And I believe that is our last game for this batch.
Yes.
So we will see you again for another video. Bye bye.